Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today on another session of We Connect Academy Learning from Women Leaders Around the World series. My name is Andrea, and today I'm very happy to introduce Marty. She is going to talk about a very important topic. The title of this webinar is Know Who You Hire. She's going to share some very important insights about what you can do to solve pre-employment problems and be more effective at hiring new talent. She is the president and CEO of BMP. It is a global company who's working in Canada. She's a WBE who's certified in Canada, and it is an expert in reference checking. It has added a wide range of pre-employment and screening services, including criminal and credit checks, education, and employment verification. So she is going to share very, very interesting insights. I will encourage everyone to please type down your questions in the chat boxes so that you can ask as many questions as possible. All of you are on mute mode, and Marty is going to introduce herself, and at the end of the webinar, I will be reading out loud your questions so that she can answer all possible questions or comments that you may have. Thank you so much, Marty, to be with us today.
Thank you, Andrea. It's a pleasure to be here today. And welcome to everyone on the webinar. So I'm assuming that most of you on the webinar are involved in hiring at some point. It's a job that we all have to do to run our businesses. We have to hire. And some of you may love it, and some of you may not. But what I'd really like to share with you today is just some things to look for when you're hiring, to make sure that you're hiring the right person the first time. Because unfortunately, flip the screen here, job candidates lie. And that's a sad reality of the world that we live in today. Now, it's interesting, when I do this presentation live, I usually go to the audience and I ask them, what % of job candidates do you think actually lie? So I just want you to think about that for a minute. Have a number in your head at what % job candidates lie. I get a wide range of numbers. When I do this presentation, I've had numbers, 10%. Somebody will say 10% of job candidates lie. I find the average is somewhere around 40% of job candidates lie. That seems to be the average when I go out to a room of people and ask. So you keep that number in your head. And we're going to go back to that in a little bit. So the problem with job candidates lying is the cost to get them out the door. So this is a really important job to know who you're hiring. So what percentage do you think of job candidates lie? First of all, I'd like you to meet our creepy guy here on the right. We don't give him a name because we feel that if we give him a name, then we become attached to him. If you come to our office, he will greet you at our door. And if I'm at a presentation, we usually bring him along with us. But we just call him our creepy guy, and we don't want to give him a name. So what % of job candidates lie? Here's the reality. This number is according to the 2017 Employment Screening Benchmark Report, and it's actually 85% of job candidates lie. It's a huge number. Now, it might not be a great, big, huge lie. It's often a misrepresentation. But at the end of the day, it's still a lie. And where we see a lot of this job candidates lying is typically in employment verifications and education verifications. It's a very competitive world today, and there's a lot of people on the job market. So it's very, very important to make sure that you're hiring who you think you are. And one of the reasons why that's so important is the cost to replace an employee today. Once you get somebody in the door, it's very expensive to replace them. What does it cost you to replace an employee? Now let's look at your bottom line. If you bring in somebody and you found out that they were lying or they misrepresented themselves, it's going to cost you 213% of their annual salary to get them out the door. So think about this. If you've got an employee who's earning $100,000 a year, it's going to cost you $213,000 to get them out the door. So again, folks, it's just really important that you know who you're hiring, you do your due diligence, so that you don't have to replace this employee and you make sure you're hiring the right person the first time. So I'm going to flip the screen here and we're going to talk about what are some things that are important to check when you are hiring. So what's important to check? Obviously, references are very important to check. They are a very good indicator on how someone is going to perform for you. References are still really valuable today. Most companies do them, and we're going to talk about that in a little more detail. What's also really important is employment verification, professional designations, education verifications. This again, going back to our creepy guy, 85% of job candidates lie. This is where you're going to find the bulk of that. Other things that are important to check are criminal checks, credit checks, exit interviews. Social media, we're going to really dive into that a little bit later in the presentation. It's also important to check driver's abstracts. There's a number of things that you can be checking, but what's really important is that you make sure you do your due diligence and you hire who you think you're hiring. Well, we're going to talk about references first. So we are the first background checking company in Canada. We've been in business since, this is our 45th year in business. So we started in the industry as an executive reference checking company. And we were investigative at that time. Now you have to think of the time. This was 1974. It was a very different world than what we live in today. People spoke to one another. There was no concern about being sued. Nobody was worried about saying something that you would get into trouble, because thankfully there wasn't social media then, so it was an open game. So how we processed reference checks at that time is we didn't call up the HR department, because in 1974 there was not HR, it was the personnel department. We would call up the personnel department and we would find a reference. We would just start speaking to whoever answered the phone, and we would find out who somebody actually reported to. And then we would get information on what they were doing. It was kind of a very basic way that we did it, but it was still very important, and people would willingly speak and give reference information. And it's still really important if you can get a qualified reference who the person actually reported into, because it is a good indicator on how somebody is going to perform for you. But now it's different today. People are a little bit more concerned about what they say. And we find today that candidates will give planted references, and they're really not someone who they reported into. So when you're going to be doing your reference checking, if you're picking up that phone, some things to really be sure of is that you grill the person you're speaking to. You want to know title, dates of employment. If it's a planted reference, they're going to be kind of hard to give you that information. You're also going to want to ask about title and responsibilities. That's the key thing. Before you go into any kind of reference check with the referee, make sure that you ask what they did for you. That will make sure it will help you to qualify that reference as legitimate and not a planted reference. So reference checks are still really important in making sure that you know who you're hiring. Now, another thing that's very important, and again, this is where 85% of job candidates will misrepresent themselves, is in their employment verification. And where we see a majority of that is on their resume, there'll be gaps of employment often. And candidates don't want you to see a gap of employment. So they may fudge their date, their start date, their end date, whatever. And here's the big thing. This now starts to no longer become a misrepresentation, but a lie. Often they'll misrepresent their title. So they may have been in a clerical role, but on their resume, they're showing that they were a supervisor. So employment verifications are very, very important to check. When you're doing an employment verification, you're going to be verifying the title that the person held at that company. You're going to want to verify dates of employment. And then, of course, you're going to ask for reason for leaving. Some companies will not provide that information to you, but that's okay. The important thing that you really want to get is the dates of employment and title that they had. Employment verifications should never be done by the reference. If you contacted a reference and given that information, don't ask them for the employment verification because they're not going to know that, or they may totally misrepresent that. Employment verification information should come directly from the HR department. Or if a lot of times they will also outsource that. And in the US, the biggest one that they'll outsource that to is the work number. So you'll have to go through a repository, and you're likely going to have to pay that repository to get that information out. But please, if you're hiring anybody, again, it's very, very important to make sure that you do your employment verification. So what else is important to check? Education and professional designations. Today, with desktop publishing, anybody can make any kind of degree that they want. And trust me, we do see it every single day. What you're going to be wanting to do here for education or professional designation is you're going to want to be calling the registrar's office of the institution where they graduated from. That's the best place to start. You start with the registrar's office and you call them, and you have to have permission again, and they will likely ask you to send them a copy of a release form, giving permission to do the education because that's important. And you're going to be asked to forward to the registrar's office of an institution a release form, and you're going to ask them, you're going to tell them what you want verified. So, Bachelor of Arts degree, University of Toronto. When we read resumes, and we read them every single day, and we get kind of good at picking up this sort of stuff. If I see a resume and it says Bachelor of Arts, University of Toronto, I know the candidate didn't graduate because they didn't have the word degree there. But somebody reading that resume might think they have. And what can even be more tricky is that the candidate can show up with a copy of that degree. But that still doesn't mean that they have the degree. It's still very important for you to go back to that institution and check. Because with desktop publishing today, anybody can make any kind of degree they want. And we recently had a case for one of our executive search firms where the candidate had actually fraudulently completed a transcript because we had gone to the institution and said to our client, they haven't graduated. Our client was getting annoyed with us because they said, we've got his transcript here. What do you mean you can't verify his degree? So we sent that transcript off to the university, and the candidate had actually created that transcript. That one we hadn't seen before. That was going to a whole nother level. But again, today with desktop publishing, anything can be made. So it's very important that you pick up the phone and you call the registrar's office at the university or college that you want to verify the degree with. That's an important piece. Call them and make sure that they have graduated. That's important to know. What else? So I just want to step back. Sometimes when you get to the university and you call the registrar's office, they may have outsourced that information. A lot more academic institutions are outsourcing the degree confirmation, and they may direct you, if you live in Canada, they will direct you to they will direct you to Aura Data. Aura Data, that's spelled A-U-R-A Data. They are a repository in Canada that stores all academic record information. So you can contact Aura Data, and if you provide them with the release form, they will verify that degree for you. They're going to charge you, but it's a nominal fee, and it's one that you should really look into. If you live in the U.S., that database where all education repository information is stored is called National Student Clearinghouse. And again, you can go online and request that, upload your consent form that the candidate has given, pay your fee, and they will verify the education. So please, the creepy guy, that 85%, again, this is a high percentage in this bracket. So make sure you are checking that any education or professional designations that your candidate have been verified. Criminal checks. Wow, this has become a big thing. We all remember that beautiful September day 18 years ago, that blue sky that morning when those two planes flew into the World Trade Center. That changed our world. Before that, criminal checks were not part of a routine onboarding process, but it really changed, and people really became concerned about who was coming into their workplace. That was a tipping point. 9/11 was a tipping point for what today is common practice. Almost all employers run some kind of criminal check before they onboard a candidate. Because going back to what we talked about earlier, the cost to replace that employee is 213% of their salary. So it's really, really important to do your criminal checks. Depending on which side of the border you live on, in both sides of the border, Canada or the US or global, if they're coming from someplace outside of Canada, again, it's very important to check. It is important to have consent. In Canada, we would run it through our CPIC database. We're going to give you a clear or a not clear. In Canada, there's different levels of criminal check. Most employers will want your basic CPIC. You may also be hiring someone who's going to be working with elderly or handicapped. At that point, you're going to be required to do a vulnerable sector check. Those third parties are no longer able to do. If you're asked by an employer to get a vulnerable sector, you're probably going to be required to go to your local police station and order that information. It's a pretty painless process, and you'll have to pay for it when you get there, but it is a good process to have. In the US, criminal checks are just a little bit more complicated, and here's your challenge in the US. That database with where the criminal record information is housed is public information. And you have to make sure that you have the right John Doe. And in the US, there's different levels of criminal checks. There's a person search, there's a county criminal check, there's a national criminal check, there's a sex offender registry search, there's a federal search. And if you ask 5 companies which sort of criminal check they run in the US, you'll probably get 5 different answers. So it's kind of a complicated process in the US, but it's one that must be done. Your company must decide which kind of criminal check that you want done. There is a sort of a standard, which basically includes the person search, the county search, and the nat crim search. That's pretty much standard. And then you have to have that done. But what's really important here is that it is public information. So it's important that someone run the criminal check that knows what they're doing, because sadly, the reality of it is there are serial suers in the US who know that someone with a similar name and date of birth might have a criminal record. So they're going to go and apply for all kinds of jobs, and then they're going to get turned down, and then they're going to go and sue those companies because they didn't do their due diligence and make sure that they have the right John Smith. So it's important to make sure the criminal check is done, and that there's a process that you follow properly to make sure that you don't encounter one of these candidates who is applying for a job with you. It can be a very complicated process. And also, again, if you're hiring anybody from any other country in the world, there's global sanction checks that you can run. There's different kind of criminal checks that can be run. And we have the ability to run a criminal check in any country in the world except for Ireland. That's the only one. For some reason, they don't make that public information to third parties such as us. But it does not matter where in the world that person is coming from. Just make sure you take the time and you make sure that a criminal check is run on them from whatever country that they are coming from. Credit checks. That's also important. If you're going to be hiring someone in finance to work in your finance department, it's somewhat important to make sure that they have a good financial background themselves. Again, you have to have consent. There's 2 databases that you can get this from. There's the Equifax database, and there's also TransUnion. Both of them are good databases. And again, you'd have to have consent and run that through those databases. But if you're going to have somebody working in your credit department, managing your company finances, it would be a wise decision to make sure that you get a credit check done from them. And you can tap into those databases and pay to have that done. Again, don't ask them to provide their own credit check. Get permission and get it done yourself just to make sure that it's not fraudulent. Again, that desktop publishing, anything can be made today. Driver records. If you're hiring a driver for your company, I highly recommend that you have their driver abstract checked. We have some companies that hire a lot of drivers, and what they'll do is they'll ensure that their drivers have an updated driver record check done. Some will do it every 6 months, but the norm seems to be every year, because you might hire somebody with a clean driving record, and guess what? 6 months down the road, they get an impaired charge, and they're never going to tell you, and you're never going to know. So it's important, if you are hiring drivers routinely, that you make sure that they provide you, or you request the driver's abstract from them, and that has to come directly from the province or the state. Social media checks. Now, we're going to dive a little bit more into social media today, because everyone is on the internet. It's crazy today, and companies are realizing that there's a ton of content out there that cannot be ignored when making a hiring decision. So, online use. These are just some numbers that are kind of overwhelming. It's really busy. There's a lot of content out there. These are some numbers from the US. There's a lot of content. It's a lot of information to sift through. But what's really important is that you're making sure you're sifting through that information properly. But what are the top used social media platforms today? Believe it or not, it's still Facebook. These numbers are from 2016, so that may have changed a little bit with all the Facebook issues that they've had going on lately. But still, the most popular site we're finding is Facebook. YouTube's right up there as well. A lot of people put some pretty crazy things on YouTube, and Instagram. Those are I'm thinking now, when we update these numbers, which need to be done shortly, that Instagram is probably starting to creep up more than Facebook because of all the issues Facebook have. But they're still going to be your top 3 platforms: Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. And these are the top used social media platforms today. LinkedIn, in terms of a job search, we still check that, and we're going to get into this a little bit more detail. We're going to dive deep into this later. But LinkedIn is still a really good platform. You're going to be looking at the content that somebody's going to be putting out there. Is it negative? Is it derogatory? Is it positive? If you're going to bring somebody into your workplace, I'm sure you're going to want the latter. You're going to want that positive person that's posting good information, good content, that's proper and not going to get you any legal trouble down the road. So these today are the most common used social media platforms, and there are so many of them, but we're just going to kind of touch on these. So what is impactful to employment? This is really becoming a thing today. There are so many things that are impactful to employment, and if not done properly, if your company is going on and doing your own social media checks, you could end up in a lot of legal trouble. And why is that? Because consumers are holding companies in high regards today. It's really important. If you can see poor conduct of one of your employees online, then well, why aren't you paying attention? Right? That's really, really important. And what are you going to be doing about any sexual harassment, violence and safety? Consumers are really holding companies accountable for this information today. So it's really, really important to know what is out there. What we're seeing is that, for instance, if one client can easily pull up a quick Google search on a member of your company, just think about this. You got a client who's pulling up a search on one of your employees, and they can find adverse content. Your client's going to be asking this very important question. Why isn't the company doing the same thing? If your clients can find information on your employees, they're going to want to know why you didn't already know about that. They're going to want to know, why did you hire this person? They're really going to want to know why you didn't do something about it. Also, outside of external risks, social media can cause a ton of internal problems for a company. Just think about internally. Employees are viewing someone making a racist post on Facebook. Let's just say, for example, well, that's the equivalent of that person standing up in the office and yelling the same thing. We hear it all the time. This is what we hear all the time. It started in the workplace and it ended up online. Or it started online and it ended up in the workplace. That, now you've got a very serious problem. And the areas of concern here, these are the concerns really for businesses. You see some HR buzzwords here: hostility, harassment, bullying, safety. These are huge HR buzzwords that you do not want your company associated with. These are all items that you would find on a code of conduct or a code of ethics policy. Another major concern here, and maybe the number one reason larger companies reach out to third parties to conduct, is the risk of bad publicity. Nobody needs an employee's crazy Facebook post hitting the news. Okay, there's a duty of care that consumers and the general public expect companies to take today. That's just what we do. And efficiently screening candidates or employees' social media is absolutely one of them. Now, we're just going to show you a little bit of content that we see every day. It's kind of blurred out, maybe offensive to some. We have to put the disclaimer on there. But these are just some of the things that we're going to be looking at. Here we go. So what we do here is we aim to protect companies from the bad decision-making employees have made in the past. And in a way, we're also predicting the type of decision makers they might be in the present and the future. We are only capable, now listen to this, this is very, very important. We are only capable and legally allowed, let's bold and highlight, we are only capable and legally allowed to view publicly available information. And because of that, these reports are also a litmus test of sorts, attesting an individual's level of responsibility. Pretty much what we're doing here, we're testing an individual's level of responsibility. And again, we are only viewing what is publicly available information. You would never, ever want to friend a potential or candidate or try to reach out to them and see. You could never ask for passwords. Please don't ever go down that road. You're only viewing publicly available information. Here's another one. So if someone, let's say, is the type of person to behave poorly online, like our candidate here, well, that's one thing. Okay, that's one thing. But if they produce adverse content, pardon me, and have it out there for the public to see, that's a whole other thing. Can that person be trusted to represent your company appropriately? I'm not sure. Like poor decision-making habits and trends displayed on social media, they tend to lead to further poor decision-making in other aspects of life, including the workplace. Here's another example. Do you want to trust this guy? I don't think so. There's a lot of content out there, and it's really important to know what someone who's going to be coming into your organization is posting. You can pick a lot up from public platforms. You can pick up language, derogatory, just a whole attitude. Do you want someone in your workplace who's going to be confrontational? Or someone who's cooperative, posts positive things, insightful information? That's what you're looking for. Not something like this. But here's the next thing. This, as an employer, is what you really do not want to happen. You don't want it to get in the news because we see that every day. This right here is what larger organizations especially report their biggest fear. Something like this hits the news. We receive Google alerts just about every day involving certain companies, something that one of their employees did on social media. That's the last place an employer ever wants to be. It reflects badly on you because you're not really paying attention to who you're hiring. So this is a question we get all the time. Okay, so I understand that the importance of doing social media checks. And you're probably thinking, okay, you know what? Next time I hire somebody, I'm going to do that. I'm just going to do it in-house. Here's some compelling reasons why you may want to rethink that. Some do-it-yourself facts. 70% of employers today are using social media to screen candidates. 70%. So we're doing it in-house. A lot of us are doing this stuff in-house. And of the companies that are conducting social media checks, 95% of them are done by their own staff. That's a scary number. There's all kinds of reasons why the do-it-yourself can get you into a lot of trouble. And let's look at some compelling reasons about some do-it-yourself facts. This is very scary. There's very strong reasons against this. For starters, it can be very cost heavy. It's very, very cost heavy, especially for companies who are hiring people at a high volume. Do you have the resources? Do you want to pay someone in HR anywhere from $17 to $60 an hour to be scrolling through someone's Facebook feed? Do you want to pay that? I don't think so. And even if they do happen to have the time, which I don't think most people should, because if you're anything like me, it becomes a rabbit hole and you're going online to look for something on somebody. And the next thing you know, I can be kind of like a squirrel. It's like, oh, look at those shoes. Aren't they nice? Maybe I'll go look at those shoes. Or wait, that looks like a nice destination. I'm going to go look at that. It's very, very cost heavy. You don't want to be doing that. But here's the important thing. It's like a rabbit hole. And it gets very messy because now you're playing detective. Here's a question. Are you really looking at the right John Smith in Toronto, for example? You're not sure. You're really not sure. And again, we can only report on what's public information. So are you forming an opinion of someone before you even hire them? That could be problematic. Have you created a program that's fair and consistent for everyone that you're hiring? You need to do that with your company. But lastly, here's the most important reason and what most HR professionals already understand. Got to bold and highlight this one. Once you've seen something, you can no longer unsee it. So think about that. If you go online, you're looking up a potential employee, once you see something, you cannot unsee it. You don't want to be that person to be criticized of that. Let's look at our friend here, Do-si-do. How many violations can we pull up on our friend Do-si-do? As soon as we open up this page, there's all kinds of protected class information jumps out at us. Marital status, military status. But, wait a minute. Does she look pregnant? Oh my goodness, this is an area that you do not want to go into. There's a lot of violations on this page that she could be found, could be a problem for your company. Let's look at some of those protected class examples. These, I'm sure everyone's familiar with. They definitely cannot be used in a hiring decision. Just simple, that simple. Viewing this protected class information can open up some huge liability risks for companies. You're creating biases. Whether intentional or not, you are creating biases. This is all the information that we need to redact out of our reports so that the end user will never know that we were there. If you start on doing your own searches, they may find out that you were there. And you could There's a lot of protected class information out there on social media today. So what exactly does a social media report look like? The following is our approach to social media background screening and details exactly what we are looking for. This slide is very, very important. These are the areas of risk we look for and flag in our report. The categories are what General Counsel likes to refer to as business-related online behavior. These are what we call our 4 filters. And we created these filters through our vast experience of working with many employment-specialized lawyers and talking to many HR professionals throughout the years. Everything here is actionable and what can legally, again, let's bold and highlight, legally be used in a hiring decision. Each of these filters then has a set of sub-filters, and we've created clear definitions surrounding each sub-filter so that the search is conducted the same consistent manner each and every time. That's so important that when you're doing social media checks, you're conducting the same consistent search each and every time. Now, how does that work? Here is the operational process. This is how it works. So our client will give us a candidate's resume. That's typically where we start. And we ask for information such as names, city, province or state that the candidate is currently living, email addresses, phone numbers, history of education and employment, because we know we've all checked that, right? We already know that. Any references. This is all the information that we accept and all the information that we pretty much get from the candidate's resume. That's where we're getting it. It's public information. The candidate has given you a resume. This is all information that we can accept and begin running through our software. Now, we call this our magic software. This is basically AI at its best in screening. What our software begins doing, it begins matching, first and foremost, to make sure we're looking at the right John Smith in Toronto. You or I could spend hours trying to do that, to making sure we have the right John Smith so we're not setting ourselves up for any legal issues. Our software does it in seconds. And here's the important thing. We will not submit a report back to you unless we are absolutely certain we have the right John Smith. And as we are finding more profiles, we often discover other pieces of information that wasn't already given to us, information like usernames. As we discover additional information, we'll run it through our software again to enhance the search. So we run it into our software, we do some human analytics, we pull out more information through our human analytics, we run it back through our software a second time. The next part then involves machine learning built up from years of data, combining that with the trained human analytics as a quality assurance factor to look for and capture with screenshots any content that falls within the parameters of our filters. Lastly, our software and analysts, they work together to redact any protected class information out of the report to complete the process. How long does this process take? Typically 1 to 3 business days. It depends on a few factors. Depends, how much content is out there to shift through, obviously their name, but on average, it's 1 to 3 business days. And this, my friends, is what a final report looks like. Here are the features of the report and what it's going to give to you. Each report that has flagged content will show what sub-filters it fell under. So that's going to show you where it fell under. It will show you where it was found. How we identified the subject, we call these identifiers, they're called match bys, and that's how we identify the right John Smith in Toronto. All the match bys will be highlighted in green and the flagged content in red. Again, everything flagged is actionable and compliant with all your privacy rules and regulations, whether it's in Canada or the US, the FCRA, Fair Credit Reporting Act, that we have to adhere to. This is all flagged and actionable by those. Intelligence data. Right now, around 10% of all reports that we run through our system come back with at least one piece of flagged content. 10%. Now that varies depending on industry, company, job, position, but we're finding it's not a high number right now. I mean, 10% is fairly low when you really think about it, what's coming back with flagged content, but that 10% is huge because of what it can cost you. But we're finding that number is going to start going up. And here's the reason why. Because we're all hiring. We're hiring a lot more millennials into our workplace today. Love the millennials. What do the millennials have? They have a strong social media footprint. They pretty much grew up on social media. So if we're doing a social media check for an executive high-level position, you're probably not going to find much on them. They probably have a LinkedIn profile. They're smart enough to know they're not going to put anything derogatory or negative on their LinkedIn profile. They might have an Instagram, maybe, probably have a Facebook, and you're probably going to see pictures of them with their pets and their families. You're not going to get a lot of derogatory information from certain demographics. But as we're hiring more millennials into our workplace, I do see this number starting to rise. 1 in 10% of social media reports coming back with at least one adverse hit. I'm thinking that number is going to rise fairly quickly. And 68% of reports with adverse content contain racist, sexist, intolerable language. Do you want someone in your workplace who's going to be bringing down the morale of everybody around you? And 50% of reports have hit in more than one category. So you may have weapons, criminal, there's just different kinds of categories that we're going to be pulling information. What you're trying to do here is guarantee yourself a safe work environment. And again, the information that we could get back is going to vary depending on the industry, the position the candidate's applying for. But if we go back to our original thing about the cost to replace an employee, that's why I wanted to start with that. It's really important to know that cost. It's 213% of their salary. And we know how much energy and time that takes. So if this is just a little thing that can be done quickly, and if it saves you making one bad hire in your company, it's worth it. It absolutely is worth it. That's it for the formal presentation. It was a pleasure to speak to everybody today. I'd really like to thank WeConnect International for the opportunity to share our insights on knowing who you hire. And I'm going to be in Baltimore at the WeBank conference, so hopefully I can connect with some of you there. I'm looking forward to that coming up in June. And I think at this point, now is the time, I should send it back to the presenter.
Hi, thank you, Marty. It was a very, very interesting presentation that everybody enjoyed it. I would like to encourage all the attendees to type down your questions on the Q&A box so that I can read them out loud and Marty will reply. I have one question from, let me see, from Simone. Do you also provide follow-up services? In which cases would you recommend it?
Yes. And now, in terms of follow-up services, do you mean following up with the employer or the candidate? If I can just get a little bit of clarifying information, follow-up services. Do you mean to recheck people every so often? Because we do follow up with a lot of positions. They'll want to have driver's abstract criminal checks done every couple of, maybe a year or every 6 months. Is that what you mean by follow-up?
Simone, if you can clarify that, I'm going to unmute. You can unmute yourself, I'm not sure. Let me see.
Mona, thank you very much for your presentation and the opportunity. We were wondering if you also think it makes a lot of sense to follow up then after the candidate has been hired and to follow up on the employees, because there might have been some critical incidents in their lives that changed their behavior?
So I think you're referring to, if I understand this, kind of like a stay interview. So once you've got somebody on board, you want to follow up with them and make sure that they're happy. And that's a very important thing to do because we know how expensive it is to hire someone. So if you have a problem in your workplace and if you can fix that and make it a good workplace, I would absolutely, if I understand that question right, follow up with the employees throughout their employment. Make sure they're happy. Happy workplace is good for everybody.
Thank you. Thank you, Marty. Anybody else has any other questions? You have a lot of thank you comments here. Great presentation. Thank you so much. Very useful. But if anybody else would like to ask something, I would like to remind everyone that this presentation, the video, the recording is going to be available on our YouTube channel. You can always go back and see it if you didn't have the chance to see it from the beginning, or if you would like to revisit any of the concepts that were shared. You can also connect with Marty. Marty, I don't know if you would like to share your email address.
Yes, absolutely, Andrew. Thanks. My email is Marty, M-A-R-T-Y, at Britton Management. That's all one word, B-R-I-T-T-O-N, management.com. So again, that's Marty at BrittonManagement.com. And our head office phone number is 416-286-6668. And of course, I'll be happy to connect with you on LinkedIn.
Yes, you will receive a follow-up email tomorrow with the information of the recording. And you can always reply to that email if you would like to connect with the presenter. So we have another question. Are there services available for Spanish-speaking markets?
Yes, we speak Spanish in-house. We speak English, French, and Spanish. We also have an international provider. If there's any other country in the world, we do have access to that as well. Absolutely.
All right, thank you.
And that also applies to criminal record information. Like I said, we can pull that data from any country in the world except for Ireland at this point because that's not allowed in that country. But anywhere where it's legally allowed, if you're hiring somebody from, China, let's say, you're going to want to make sure that we run a criminal check in China as well as in Canada.
Perfect. That is very helpful for all the women-owned businesses that are probably doing businesses in other countries at the same time.
Yes.
Elena has a follow-up question. And can you share some costs around that, or would you recommend sending a follow-up email?
Yeah, I would recommend sending a follow-up email because it's going to depend which country you're coming from, because the costs vary depending on the country and the currency. But I mean, we typically just like kind of a ballpark, like it would be a whole package. It would depend on what type of check that you're wanting. So we actually package that up. But I will say, if you were only interested in the social media part, us running a social media check, that costs is well under $100 for that individual check on its own. But we'd have to look and see what other services they want, because we usually try to package and bundle everything together for employers so they're getting the best value for their dollar.
Great, thank you. I'm happy to connect you, Elena, with Marty so that you can continue this discussion if you are interested in hiring her services. You will receive an email from me tomorrow. I don't know if anybody else has any other question. You will receive this follow-up email. I think that's pretty much what you need to know. I don't know if you have any other last comments, Marty.
I'm just hoping that I'm going to see a number of people in Baltimore, and I'd be happy to have conversations with you there in any ways that we can help ensure that you're hiring the right person the first time.
Yeah, I'm sure you might have some follow-up emails. And typically, people, once they see the presentation, most likely the recording, you will hear back from people.
Yeah, that would be wonderful. Be happy to hear back and assist anybody with any questions that they may have in making sure that everybody has a safe workplace.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I think, yeah, everybody, you're getting a lot of thank you notes. So thank you, Marty. It was a great presentation, and thank you everyone for joining. Please stay tuned to our next, to the upcoming webinars. Many interesting topics are coming up, so please stay tuned and wait for our follow-up email. Thank you so much, Marty, for your time.
All right. Thank you all, and I hope to see you all in Baltimore.
Yes. Thank you so much.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.